Sunday, Sunday, Sunday. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another episode of True Story Live. Tonight's topic is a doozy, purity culture. And this idea came to us from one of our listeners. And so we're excited to take a deep dive into this very controversial topic. I don't know. I think it's controversial. Maybe other people don't. I don't know. We'll see, though. We'll certainly give it the old TSL try and see what you guys think. All right. So, as usual, first up, we introduce the panel. My name is Jason. I'm the host of the broadcast, and I could not do it without these three other wonderful people that join me every Sunday, starting out with our friend Glenn from Australia. Glenn, take a minute to say hello to the peoples, if you would.
Yeah, hi, and as I was saying to Crips when I was reading the write-up, I was cringing. Like, almost feeling sick. I thought, oh my goodness, this is a shocker. So I can only but imagine some of the consequences and difficulties that people have faced as a result of this issue. So it's really
Yeah.
good to try to put something objective and initiate some discussion about it, because it
Yeah.
seems to be a very important topic.
Agreed. Hey, Glenn, your volume is a little low.
Sure, let me just try it. You
Sure.
can tell me. Oh, that's my chair. How's that?
That's
How's that sound? Is that better?
Uh,
better.
it's better, but you sound far away. Sounds like you're.
Hang on. No, it should be right. I can't do much about it.
Oh,
It's
Just
same as
yell at
usual.
us.
Oh, I can do that.
Nice.
I'm gonna see if I can do anything to. I don't know where your volume is. Edit mic settings. Let's see. Oh, reduce mic background noise. Okay, here we go. All right, try it now.
Yeah. I saw Celine throw it into the mix. I find grown men's obsession with virginity is really creepy. I
Oh,
find it creepy as well, to be honest.
okay, that's a little bit better. All right, we'll go with that.
Okay, thanks.
Uh, Also with us, as usual, is our friend Marisa from Ohio. The
Did you
name
say
works as well.
Mez?
Sometimes I do say that. Sometimes I do. Marisa, if you take a second to say hello to the peoples, please.
Thank you, Jason. Hello to the people. Hello, everybody in the chat. Thank you for joining us tonight. Whether you're with us live, whether you're lurking or catching the replay here, it's Sunday, Sunday, Sunday. Time for another hip deep conversation on True Story Live.
I
And
love it.
tonight, we're going to talk about purity culture, how it affects you or has not affected you, things such as that, and much, much more. I will be sharing links throughout the evening for some of my friends that I know are okay with that. If you come in and you would like your link shared, please let us know. We'll share your link. If you do not want your link shared, also please let us know and we will respect your wishes. That being said, I can't wait to jump right in. My hip boots are on. Let's go.
I love it. Marisa, you sound a little more animated than you have in a couple of weeks. Are you
Well,
feeling better?
thank you, Jesus. I feel great. Had a lot of people praying for me, and I do feel a lot better. And I had a
Good.
surprise visit from my son, also
Oh,
named Jason.
Jason,
So
It's a good
little
name.
Jason will help you out. So that's true.
I
Really
love it.
happy. I've got to make some good food for the kids. Venison chili last night.
Ooh,
Oh, ho, ho,
Oh,
ho.
sounds
baby.
amazing.
Oh, with portobello
Venison's
mushroom.
delicious.
Oh,
Oh,
all right. Looking forward to
Marisa,
get into the discussion. Woo!
Marisa,
Yes.
I say yes to that. I say
Oh,
yes
it was.
to
It turned
venison
out
stew.
so well, and it had been many, many years. Being from Michigan, I
Yeah,
love venison. My
yeah,
family hunted a lot, so it was a little taste of, comfort food. It was really, really
right.
good.
Yeah,
Nice.
I don't think you can be considered an authentic Michigander if you don't like venison. I'm
One
not
would
sure.
think so. One would think so. It was
It's
so
up.
good.
It's probably up for debate, but We'll tackle that on another episode of True Story Live. Anyway, thank you. And last but certainly not least, my amazing, intelligent, wonderful wife, Jennifer, who is also the writer of tonight's write-up. So we'll be excited to hear from her perspective, how she views these things. Of course, we'll all have a chance to tell about our own experiences with this purity culture, and we have a couple surprises to add as well. So, Jen, take a minute to say hello to the peoples.
All right, all right. Hey guys, good to be here. Good to be here with you guys in the chat and on the panel. And this is a interesting topic. When I was doing research for it. Gosh, there's so many stories and articles and videos. Yeah. It's a lot.
Yeah.
But it's also good to know that people that are struggling with this have a lot of support. So that's very encouraging.
Yeah. Thank you, Jen. I watched another video that had nothing to do with purity culture, but it's one of the deconstructors that I listened to, and he mentioned it. You know, he was talking about other things, and he just mentioned purity culture and how damaging that can be. It seems coincidental, but that happened just today.
Excuse me.
Unrelated video. So, and it's interesting. Jen, before we move forward, if you take a second to say hello to the folks in the chat, then we'll get going.
Absolutely. Well, we've got our very own Nez and Galenzo, Indigo Violet. Celine is here. So grateful. This was actually a topic she's been wanting us to do for a while. Celine, thank you so much for your patience. And I think the timing is perfect. John Robb is in the chat. And I think that's it so far. And we'll continue to say hello to people as they come in.
That's it. All right.
Yeah.
Without further ado, we're going to hear from Jennifer. She's going to read her write-up, and then I will take it from there when she's finished.
All right. Thanks, guys. All right. Purity culture. Where do I even begin with this topic? Its damage is far-reaching. When I think about the messages we get about God growing up, I think of how we are taught to find our identity in Christ. I agree with this to a degree. But when I was taught about and brought through purity culture in my teen years, it insidiously gave me the message that my worth wasn't in God. It was in my body, my hymen being intact for marriage. Men and women are so much more than our purity. We are sons and daughters of God. We are friends. We are brothers and sisters. We are helpers. Each one of us are unique and special in our own ways. Purity culture, in my opinion, boils us down to an object to keep pure. I was terrified of sex growing up. It was bad, dirty, of the devil, and so much more. I wasn't taught about the beauties of sex and how incredible it can be between two people, how it was created by God for men and women, a whole other level of love expressed between husbands and wives. Men are told they have no control over their urges, and then women become the gatekeepers of sex with the responsibility of keeping the man pure. And on top of that pressure, our own pleasures and needs are ignored. And that's not in every case, but most cases.
Right.
I was also taught that sex was for men, not women, that a woman's job was to give it to her husband anytime, without question, the submissive wife. These two messages linked together really hurt me. I was sexually active with my first boyfriend in high school. I grew up learning codependency and people-pleasing from my family of origin. I wasn't taught how to say no or anything about personal boundaries. I wasn't taught about coercion in relationships and how to speak up regarding my consent. So within my first marriage, I didn't know I could say no. Also, I felt my worth was in a man wanting me. Sad, I know. My first experience screwed me up because of what I was taught. Instead of it being just a mistake or a misstep, I felt lower than dirt, like a slut, used garbage, and that no one would want me because of what I had done. Sorry.
It's okay. Take your time.
This is...
It's very difficult to talk about.
This is a lot of weight for a young person to carry, and I carried it for years. I understand the premise of purity culture and how it was supposed to help Young people wait until they were married, but also for us to not get involved with adult things before we are ready, before our brains are fully developed and we are mature enough to handle it. I slept with my high school boyfriend. Does that make me trash? Am I unredeemable? Am I now worthless because my hymen was broken before marriage? No. What are the far-reaching effects of putting such a drastic importance and focus on staying pure? Shame. I don't know about anyone else who grew up in this culture, but my young mind was preoccupied with it. It took over my thoughts, and when I messed up, down I went into a black hole of shame and guilt. In this article written by licensed therapist Megan Turner, we see a few bullet points. And just so you guys know, in the description, there's just the title of the bullet points, and I'm going to read through because it wouldn't fit. Modest is hottest, and women are responsible for men's sexual thoughts. Female clothing can cause a man to lust if it is considered too revealing. It is the woman's responsibility to dress herself in a way that keeps men pure. Virginity is very important. In purity culture, virginity is taught using metaphors. Virginity is compared to being a beautiful rose, and the petals are tossed on the ground and trampled on once virginity is lost. In other words, virginity is prioritized, and if you lose your virginity, you're disgusting and no one will ever want you. Next one is abstinence until marriage is the only option. You should abstain from sex until your wedding night, at which time you will turn into a mind-blowing sex machine. If you do become sexually active before marriage, you are cheating on your future spouse. This includes masturbation, which was viewed as akin to premarital sex. Next one, women are taught that their bodies are bad. Purity culture reinforces traditional gender roles. Thus, women are typically taught that their bodies are impure and because of that should dress discreetly and modestly. Next one, any physical contact is not permitted. Because sex is considered sinful, people often refrain from any type of sexual acts, such as kissing, touching, and intercourse, until they are married. Last one is authorities use fear tactics instead of actual information, involving the community and/or family members in policing others' sexual habits and fostering strict methods of sex education, resulting in people being unprepared for sexually, contraception, and so forth. Purity culture boils us down to just our bodies, and for women, our hymen, and it takes away our humanity. I want to share some quotes with from some friends before I continue, but I think I'm going to wait till the end. Is that okay, Jason?
Sure.
Sexual education in the church is woefully lacking, and it affects everyone. Not to mention, I believe this message that makes women feel like objects and sex being an obligation to the man. It highly affects our libidos, and many women struggle with sexual pain like vaginismus. Studies show that women in evangelical churches and a lot of other religions experience vaginismus 22% more than women who are not part of a religious community. Your whole teendom is filled with the message, sex is bad, sex is bad, sex is bad, and overnight you're supposed to flip your whole paradigm of sex to being good, beautiful, something wonderful to experience with your spouse. All these messages remain in our body. It doesn't go away overnight or after vows and rings have been exchanged. Marriage doesn't erase all the messages given to us. Purity culture also pushes people into marriage too quickly because they want to stay, quote, pure, unquote, but have all of these urges. And then we're down to the questions. So I'm going to just share a couple of comments. And the first couple comments I got were from guys, which really surprised me. And I wish I would have sent them to you because I don't know if I'm going to not be able to cry.
Oh,
I'll try.
Okay. If you cry, it's okay.
Yeah. So this is from a gentleman named Greg. Before they called it purity culture, it was essentially a shame hammer used like whack-a-mole on kids before, during, and after puberty. I have witnessed it do untold damage over the decades. And he wrote an article back in the 70s about it. He was going to send it to me, but he didn't get a chance to. Another gentleman, Kevin, said, it led me to be suicidal. The unrelenting demands and shame whenever you failed still affects me in my 40s today. This is from a gentleman named Dave. I hated so many parts of me for so long that even though I started deconstructing at 18, I'm 46 now and just beginning to learn how to accept my full self.
Mm.
Oh, yeah, and I've damn near killed myself several ways, both actively and passively, due to this. Heather shared, she said, I married very young into an abusive relationship that lasted 10 years before I got the courage to leave. And to make it worse, was ostracized when I divorced by the very people in the church who encouraged marrying quickly to avoid living in sin.
Mm.
Tammy shared, she said, looking back, I think I basically married someone because I needed to have sex at that age of my life. You are taught how bad it is, and then magically on your wedding day, it's supposed to be the best thing ever. It's not an easy switch to flip on your head. Add patriarchy to that, and you have someone who grabs your body parts at will and thinks sex is their right at any time and has no thought for your own feelings or needs. I'm in my late 50s, and I'm still trying to recover from it.
Mm.
And that's actually it that I have. Oh, wait, I've got one more.
Okay.
This is from Cassie. She said, purity culture taught me that I was dirty, used up, and that no man would want me after I was raped by a family friend at 14. I hid it for 2 years, in part because of purity culture and not wanting anyone to know that I was as good as chewed up gum. Everyone was pounding it into my head, how important it was to preserve my virginity when technically it was already gone. Being that I didn't have my purity to give to anyone anymore, I just had sex with whoever I wanted to as an act of rebellion. And I can add probably trauma as well, which led to further shame and massive guilt. I'm 41 now, and I've only just started to work this out in therapy. I will not allow it to steal from me anymore. Okay, so I'll save the thank you for joining us in this discussion till when we're done. And Jason, if you want to read the questions, thanks guys for helping me get through that.
Sure. Thank you, Jen. First of all, as Glenn said in the chat, very courageous, and I would agree. This is not easy stuff to talk about, especially when it has affected you. And we're going to get into, Jen read a couple comments from men. I have heard from people, this is really only affects women mostly. But that's not true. And when we get into the questions, I'll talk about, from my perspective, some of the things that I felt as a result of purity culture and how it's affected me. So we just also want to say, anyone in the chat, if you would like to share any answers to the questions, we definitely want to hear from you. You are part of True Story Live and always have been. And just if you feel comfortable. So when we come to the questions, please feel free to share your answers in the chat. And if you don't want them read, just please indicate that, just like we do with sharing links. But if you don't indicate in the chat that you don't want them shared, then I will share your comments as well. Okay. All right. Before we get going, I do want to welcome Wild RAT, who popped in the chat while Jen was reading, and also our friend Christ is the Truth is also here. So anyone else that pops in, as Jen said earlier, we'll make sure to say hello to everyone. If anyone new does come in tonight, please, as you always do, make them feel welcome. We'd appreciate that so much. And again, thank you guys for being here tonight. We really appreciate it. All right. So the first question tonight is, how has purity culture affected you, or how have you seen it affect other people you know? How has purity culture affected you, or how have you seen it affect other people you know? Does anyone have a burning desire to kick off the first question? Okay, I will be glad to start on this one. Jen and I talked a lot about this, but as Jen had mentioned, this is a popular topic. I just did a search on YouTube to see what I could find. And there are lots of videos done on this. And also one of the folks that's written a book that Jen and I read, and many of her articles, she talks about this idea a lot and how destructive it can be. And I also want to say, when we talk about these things, when we answer the questions, we know that it's not every person that is part of purity culture is intending to make people victims or intending to be abusive. We just want to make that clear. There are always different circumstances, and some people, especially at the beginning of this, it seemed like a good idea, I would think. They can't anticipate how damaging it can be to some people. Also want to
And
say hello. Oh, sorry.
oh, I just was going to add to your thought.
Please.
I truly don't think the majority of people that taught this knew what it was going to do. I think parents and leaders at churches were very concerned about, kids having sex, and I get that. That's totally valid. I just wish they would have gone about it a different way.
Hmm.
So yeah, we're not trying to hang people
No,
per
no.
se, you know what I mean? Because
Mhm.
I do understand this comes from a place of worry and fear,
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, perfect. All right. So I want to say hello to Johnny Smallpepper, who just popped in the chat. We're glad to have you, Johnny Smallpepper. Glad you're here. All right. So first, I'll answer the first part. How has it affected me? So Jen highlighted a couple things. Women are made into the gatekeepers of their sexuality, and the biggest way it impacted me, many books. One written by Dr. James Dobson. Actually, my mom had me read a couple books from him in my adolescence. One was about adolescence. The other one was about the strong-willed child, which I was labeled to be. I have found that very destructive for me personally, but that's a topic for another night. And the one about adolescence talked a lot about the raging hormones that a boy has, especially through adolescence. And I'm not saying it's not true. I remember how they felt in me, the hormones. I remember an uptick in my sexual desire, no doubt about that. But we're made to feel like we have zero control over these things.
As men, you're saying, as
As
boys?
men, yes, we have zero control over it. So that did affect me. I was made to feel bad too. Jen said in this write up, sex is bad, sex is bad, sex is bad. And she equated masturbation to being just as bad. And that's the way I felt. Of course, masturbation was considered a sin before God in the same way that sex out of marriage is. And I often felt dirty. I often felt like, oh, what point is there? Because Dr. Dobson says I have no control over my urges. So that's probably the biggest way that the purity culture affected me. And I'll just add briefly, it was mainly for women. It was fathers, if I remember that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but fathers would buy a purity ring for their daughter. And sometimes there was a dinner or a lunch of some sort.
A
And
dance?
a dance. Yeah, I forgot about the dance part. So it was a
Contracts like
contract. It was
that you sign?
yep, it was a big deal. So there wasn't that much for men, but I do remember my dad bought me a purity ring, and I wore it proudly. And I can't say that affected me negatively. I thought it was a cool thing that my dad took the time and thought. I'm sure it was my mother's idea, but that happened, and um, there was a little bit of shame that came along with that. Not anything my dad did necessarily, but just by doing that, I felt obligated in some ways to stay pure, not just for myself, not just for God, but for my dad. Which that seems weird to me now that I mention it. It just
Well, you
seems
wanted to
weird.
make him proud.
I did want to make him proud, and it was very meaningful to me. Like I said, that he got me a ring. So there's that. As far as how I've seen it affect other people, I remember having conversations with women at that time, or girls, in church groups and stuff, because this was a topic. It made the rounds in the churches during I think it was late 80s, early 90s. It was more popular in the 90s, I think, but maybe I'm wrong about that. And it seemed to put a lot of pressure on women. That whole gatekeeper thing. Women are told that men cannot control their urges, so they have to, excuse the term, but keep their legs closed, and they have to be in control. And I'll add to that by saying that when they talk about making out, men having the idea, or boys hearing that they can't control their hormones. It really was pervasive. The idea that if you're going out and making a car, there's nothing you can do. You're going to make a move on your girlfriend. It's going to happen. And so it was, I saw it affect other people, and all the pressure. And even back then I thought, wow, what a tremendous amount of pressure to put on a girl, that she's completely in charge of what happens if you're making out. So I'll stop there, but that is just, I talked a little bit about how it affected me personally, and what I saw with other people that I was involved with. So that's my answer. Who'd like to go next?
Read the question again.
Sure. How has purity culture affected you, or how have you seen it affect other people you know?
I'll admit that back when this was going on, like in my youth group, all of us girls were super excited. And I think at that age, I guess I can only speak for me, I was very much wanting to make the adults around me proud, just like you were with your dad, know. And at the time that we had these talks in youth group, I hadn't dated anyone, like, you know what I mean? I wasn't in that place yet. It was like probably 14, 15.
Right.
And we were just like, it seemed to be the new in thing in church and the popular thing to do and what everybody was doing. So there's all this hype around it. And I also, I didn't want to do anything bad. I very much wanted to please God and please my parents and please the leaders and stuff. So there was this excitement around it. It hasn't been until later in life, when I've talked to other people that have lived through life between that time and now, that have lived through the repercussions of these messages and how it's affected them, especially after marriage.
Right.
That I've seen, I've had friends that have had vaginismus. I had one couple friend that I went to church with when I got married to my first husband. They ended up getting divorced because the wife, they could not have intercourse. She was in so much pain. Her muscles would just not unclench. And it totally blew it up, Yeah. And I've heard other couples that have actually, the woman, when she's dealing with, that kind of pain, sexual pain, she's gone and seen a pelvic floor specialist, and they have pelvic floor specialists and also physical therapists that work with you to help calm your anxieties, because that's what this does. It creates a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety, a lot of guilt and shame, and it gets stored in your body. And I watched a TEDx earlier. There was a woman who was talking about her own experience from just the damages of purity culture, and she said it so well. She said, we as women that go through this teaching, we're expected to turn on our, I don't even know what you call it,
libido.
Sexual, not just, I guess libido, but like all these messages, they expect us to, like a light switch, to flip it off.
Right.
So all these messages end overnight after you get married, and you're supposed to be fine with sex. Even, like for me, for years after I got married to my first husband, it was like I kept having to remind myself, I'm married. Because I had so many issues with feeling dirty, with feeling shame, with feeling guilt, even after I was married. And I was like, what is wrong with me? And they even thinking there was something wrong with me and not recognizing that it was the messages and how they were taught and stuff. I didn't talk to anybody about it. It was just, there was a lot of shame with it. And
Yeah.
I felt very alone. And it just kind of compounded the issue because I didn't have anybody to talk to. I truly felt like I was the only one. There's a lot more information out there now about this, but so I'm grateful. And then reading these messages today and talking with a few other friends,
Yeah.
it's overwhelming. It's heartbreaking.
It sure is. Yeah. Thank you, Jen. Just real quick, I want to say hello to our friend Bobby Meyer, who popped in the chat. Welcome, Bobby. Thank you
Hey,
for
Bobby.
being here. And also, believe on the Lord Jesus Christ is also here. Welcome, both of you. Before we get to Glenn and Marisa, Christ is the Truth said in the chat, what do you guys mean by purity culture exactly? I mean, if we're talking about saving it until marriage, it's not a culture, it's Bible. And then he follows up with, I might be misunderstanding something, though.
You want me to explain?
Yeah, please do. It is a fair question.
Yeah,
Glenn said
absolutely.
fair question. It's a fair question. And maybe we should have described it for those people that maybe are younger and weren't necessarily aware of the quote unquote purity culture that some of us older folks went through. Go ahead, Jen.
So it's not simply the teaching of waiting till marriage. It's like a whole other bunch of baggage connected to it. Like Jason had mentioned, and I don't know if he was here when you walked through that, Jason, about there being purity rings and, father-daughter purity dances and certificates and youth group that you had signed to promise that you weren't going to sleep with anybody till you got married. And the other thing I was going to mention, flew out of my head. Also, and the girls especially, I read some stories today. There was one story where a youth group teacher, a woman, took the girls aside. She brought in some baked brownies and she was like, who wants brownies? And all the girls raised their hand and she left the brownies in the room. This is at church. She took them outside with a knife to cut the brownies. She drug the knife through dog shit. She had the girls walk back into the room with her and she cut the brownies in squares with that knife that she dragged through that dog crap. And she said, who wants brownies now? And none of the girls raised their hands. And she started to explain that this is what, not purity culture, but this is what, how did she explain it? I can't remember. She was like, who wants the brownies when it's been exposed to this dirty knife? And so there's a lot of stories of how youth leaders have used symbolism to explain how the world will see you, how men will see you, how people in church will see you if you have sex before marriage. There's been metaphors of you're a chewed up piece of gum. Yep. There's metaphors of you being a rose and the petals being trampled, like I read in the write-up. There's all these different metaphors that they share to get the point across to girls. And this one story she told, she said all the guys in the youth group were out like kayaking on the lake next to the church when this talk was happening. So it was mainly geared toward girls.
Women, of course.
Now I know that some guys have gone through purity culture as well, but it seems to be more geared toward the girls and young women. So it's not just simply the cut and dry, teaching of wait till marriage to have sex. It's like this whole other situation on top of it to sort of drill the point home, but it's just caused a lot of damage.
Yeah. That's good. Thank you, Jen. And on top of that, if you didn't hear it at the beginning, I was talking about Jen mentioned the dance. There was a dinner. There usually was a ring and a contract that was involved between the father and the daughter. So aside from everything else that we've mentioned so far, think about the pressure that is on a young lady. Also, hearing that boys have no control over their raging hormones and that they are responsible for
keeping the boys in check.
And add to that the other aspects that Jen mentioned at the beginning of the write-up that aren't necessarily, bullet points of the purity culture, but the idea that a woman has to be careful, dress modestly. They have to, they're responsible for turning a guy on. And this also happens when women get raped. They're questioned. What were you wearing that night? Did you drink? That's a different topic, but it's all about responsibility. And I feel within Christianity, this is my personal opinion, that all this started out with blaming Eve for sin from the beginning. Now, you may disagree with that, but I think women have had a bad rap since the start, plain and simple. I think that they have been demonized. They have been subjugated. They are considered less than. And there's a lot to back that idea up. And yes, things have changed. It's different than it was in the 50s, different than in the 40s and earlier. Women are out in the workforce now, and they're still working to have the same pay that men have, which I think is a no-brainer. But there are still lingering effects of this idea that women are in charge of causing sin. So I hope that helps explain it a little bit.
Yeah, he had said in the chat, he said, thank you for the explanation.
Okay, thanks, Jen. I didn't see that. All right. So let's go to Marisa on this. Let me read the question again. Let me scroll back down. How has purity culture affected you, or how have you seen it affect other people you know, Marisa?
It didn't really affect me per se as far as the cultural movement that came a little after my time, I would say.
Oh.
I'm a little bit. I didn't see anybody in my youth group or anything we didn't have the purity rings. That just was not that came right after me, I think, not long after my time, but I can see where people can use other people's decisions to bring guilt and shame.
Right.
And sex is just one way to do that.
Yeah.
And that happens everywhere, whether it's in a religious setting or not. And there's many cultures, many dynamics, groups of humans out there that if you go against what they teach you personally, then naturally comes the guilt and the shame.
Yeah.
The guilt and shame I dealt with, and I would say my mother did even more so, was the having sex before marriage. If I understand correctly, it didn't really affect me so much, but I remember stories of my mother telling, relating later that she was looked on as a whore, that family members would call her a whore, and other lovely things. When the way you look to the community at large, especially within, say, a body of church membership, becomes more important than the person that you are, being my mother's case, they were more concerned about how that would look instead of dealing and helping the person who's going through it.
Wow.
That's a pity and a real tragedy.
I'm sorry your mom went through that, Ness.
Whatever, she got through it just fine, and bless her heart. But that's not to say I disagree with the idea of obeying scripture and fleeing fornication, as is stated in 1 Corinthians 6:18. Flee fornication, every sin that a man doeth is without the body, but he that committeth fornication sinneth against his own body. And I believe the Bible, and I believe that to be true. And I personally regret a lot of decisions and choices I made, but that's for me.
Yeah.
Those were things I chose to do or not do, and nobody else has the right to shame and blame others for their own decisions. We're to take the beam out of our own eye before we go pointing out, little specks in other people's eyes,
Right.
if I remember scripture correctly. So, while I agree that, yes, I believe that we should be abstaining from fornication, especially if you are a uh, follower of Jesus Christ. I believe that. I don't believe there's a thing wrong with that. But what I do believe is wrong is when other people want to tear other people down for things they've said and done. And it's wrong to make somebody think within the body of Christ, especially, that that's the unforgivable sin. Because if they'll read the scripture, they will find that the only unforgivable sin is blaspheming the Holy Spirit. Everything else can be forgiven under the blood of Jesus. So that's all I have to say about that.
Thank you, Naz.
Yep.
Yeah, really. I appreciate the way you answered that, Naz.
Yeah.
That was
And
really
I
good.
was gonna, I don't know if you guys read this in the comments that I put up earlier. And it's just so interesting because while I was reading the write up, a thought dropped in my head and it said, and I'm not going to word this correctly, I don't think, but sex is the only sin that changes after you're married,
Right.
which is kind of,
Interesting.
it is what it is, but it's interesting because all other sins, they're like wrong throughout your entire life, like
Right.
you being here on earth before you go.
Well, that is
You know what I mean?
really
So I just thought, whoa, maybe that's why
wow.
it's so difficult, because purity culture and the way it has been pushed and the damage that it's done, and then the trying to flip a light switch overnight when you get married, how
Yeah.
difficult that is, because
Wow.
it's considered a sin before marriage.
Wow.
So I'm not, I'm just stating that I think that's interesting. I just was
No,
like,
it
oh,
is. It is. I never thought of it like that, but you're absolutely right. So it's a sin, it's a sin, it's a sin, it's a sin. Then you have some vows and get a ring, and then it's the wedding bed is not defiled, the marriage bed rather.
yeah,
Yeah. How do you make that switch overnight? On your wedding night, you're supposed to, and guys too. It's not just women, because guys have the masturbation, and just because they have raging hormones, it doesn't mean that they don't have guilt for anything that they've done.
yeah,
It works both ways. So they're both just supposed to, on their wedding night, just let all of that go, all that built up tension that they've had about not being allowed or not being approved to have sex, and then they do have sex, and all of a sudden it's right. That's a really good point, Jen. And I just want to say something about what Marisa said, because she explained it very well and brought up a good point. She talked about fornication and stuff like that. And I think you guys all understand this, and I don't necessarily feel like I have to make this point, but I'm going to anyway. And that is, we're not doing this topic to support fornication. That's not the
yeah.
point
Thank you for saying that.
of tonight. We're not saying it's wrong to wait until marriage. We're not saying it's foolish to try to encourage young people to keep their virginity until they're married or anything like that. That's a different point for a different night. But it's not what we're saying. We're saying that there were things that were damaging about purity culture, and we're asking questions and having discussions about what that might look like. Okay, so just wanted to throw that in there. All right, Glenn, if you could answer from your perspective, even if it's a short answer. I don't know how this would have affected you in any way, but I'm sure you have something.
A short answer.
Okay.
There's a few things here. First of all, I think this system is designed to patronise women and exalt men, and I don't like it.
Right.
At all. I think it's disrespectful to women.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I just can't entertain it. I mean, this has nothing to do with people making a free choice whether they have sex or they don't.
Right.
But why are women who decide to do so treated differently from men who do so? To my mind, that is ridiculous. And I think what really needs to be emphasised here is a few things. number one, this just is not relevant all just to 20-year-olds. This carries on, and I have personal experience here, which I'll try to be respectful when I go into it in a minute. This carries on 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, in many cases to end of life. This is serious stuff, not to be, just sort of look at lightly, oh, you should remain pure until marriage. No, life goes on after marriage. Life goes
Right.
on after divorce.
Right.
Life goes on too for other people when someone's in the mental house, because that's where it sends some people.
Yeah.
And I had a comment sent to me by someone, which I just hang on a minute. I
Sure.
thought it was really good. It says, do you think that if you label it a purity culture, inverted commas, that makes it easy to accept that you are a person who is imperfect to begin with, according to the Christian culture?
Wow.
Wait, can you explain that to me? I don't know why that went over my head.
Do you think with putting the label purity culture on at the beginning sort of makes you feel like you're already dirty?
Oh.
Because you can never be, you're not pure to start with, because
Right.
see, this, the word they've used, purity culture, they haven't used the word sinning culture.
Right.
They call it purity culture.
That's true.
Really, when it's all about sin, isn't it?
It is. And I can say more about what you just said, that comment to tie it in. So you made the point in paraphrasing the comment that you're already considered impure. If they put purity culture on it, that already from the jump makes you feel like you're missing something already.
Yeah, but the truth is you're not pure anyway, are you? Whether you sleep with someone in advance of marriage or you don't.
Right. Right. Because of sin, you're
Exactly.
worthless pieces of garbage, and you're on the way to hell. And there's the only thing you can do about that is to accept what Jesus did. And we fought that a lot on this on TSL. I have railed and railed and railed, and we've talked about Jesus's commandment: love God with everything and love your neighbor as yourself. Some people are probably already tired of it. We talk about it so much, but I feel like it's super important. I feel like the Christianity in general has started us out on the wrong foot when it comes to not explaining better. I mean, it's fine to say we're sinners. To me, that's relevant. But the way that how horrible we are is wrapped within that makes it difficult to ever feel good about oneself. That's the way I feel about it, at least.
Okay, I'll go. I'll attempt to go personal, because it is very personal to me in a
Sure.
couple of respects. And as I said to you this morning, I felt like throwing up,
Oh yeah.
because this stuff is really significant when you see the effect it has on some people.
Yeah.
Okay, so, and I have to emphasise, I'm doing my absolute best to be respectful here to the people concerned. So
Sure.
I'm not going to declare everything, but let's just put it on the table so
Okay.
that other people can see that, the effects of some of this. Okay, I was having a chat to my daughter-in-law a while ago, and she said, we were just talking about divorce and all that kind of stuff, and she said, I'm cutting bits out here to keep it respectful. She said, I think your ex-wife is asexual. And I said, well, I agree with you, and here's the reason why. And we went through how she was part of this culture, how she was how in with the Bible studies and all of this, and etc. etc. Now and all we saw is this has lived with her through her whole life. So she's gone from a young woman to an older woman, and it's the same thing. So in other words, the teaching is that you're a dirty piece of crap. Sex is dirty. I mean, it's
Yeah.
horrendous, horrible stuff. So
Yep.
I'll leave it there. But that's effectively shut out opportunity for one part of a relationship, a lovely part of a relationship for someone. And how many other people would be in the same boat. I guess that there's an awful lot.
Wow.
Because they can't come to grips from what happened at the beginning, that basically sex is dirty and I am dirty. I mean, that's heavy imagery. Okay.
Sure.
Okay, number two is that sometimes, and as I said, this doesn't necessarily apply to 20-year-olds. This can be 50-year-olds, 60-year-olds, whatever. At whatever age, there comes a point where people enter and leave new relationships. But they can bring baggage with them. No matter if they've been around the traps a few times or behind the shed, inverted commas, a few times, they still carry the baggage. Now, the question I've got for everybody here is, why is it so difficult to let go? And I saw and heard Jen courageously speak to tears. I thought that was beautiful, but it just shows the depth of what this stuff can do when it gets inside people's heads.
Yeah.
So I think it's extremely sad, and I would hope that not one other person ever has to go through that. I know they will, but it would be my hope that they don't have to. Sure, do make your choices,
Right.
but surely don't let it take you to the point where you feel less than a whole person.
Right.
That's my rant.
No, that was wonderful.
Thanks,
I anticipated a very short answer, but that I'm pleasantly surprised at what lengths you went through to make that point. So thank you, Glenn. I appreciate that. I think I did not say hello to Wisconsin Greg, who popped in here a little while ago. So Wisconsin Greg, welcome. Thank you. Some really good comments. I'm trying, while other people are speaking, to post some of the comments on the screen. So bear with me as I do that. Okay. I think, does anyone have anything else to say about the first question? Anything you would like to add? Okay. Next question. Did it have negative effects on your self-esteem and identity as a person, or was it beneficial? In reference to purity culture, did it have negative effects on your self-esteem and identity as a person, or was it beneficial? Anyone want to tackle this second question first?
I'll go first.
All right.
It definitely had a negative effect on my self-esteem. Well, self-esteem. So when I mentioned about when they first brought up, I want to call it curriculum in a sense, messages, teachings.
Yeah.
When it first came on the scene within youth group, because of the excitement, this opportunity to please God, to please the leaders, to please our parents, to please the youth director, and kind of get on what what Christians do train,
Yeah.
So that it was that in the beginning, and I think once hitting puberty, and all of you guys are adults, what's involved with that, with the hormones and stuff, and urges and curiosity. I think just on going down the road of having thoughts and masturbation and, exploring your body as a person.
Yeah.
Therein comes the guilt and shame. And I think that sometimes happens when you don't have the other leg of this, which should be, in my opinion, is more education on what sex is and a different approach as to why it is beneficial, not just with pleasing God and obeying God, but why it's beneficial and why God created it that way.
Yeah.
It's like, I feel like if things were explained in the sense of, sex is a beautiful thing between two people. It's a level of intimacy that you don't have with anybody else. All the pluses of it, and saying these are the reasons why it's important to wait. And then having other talks about, society and the world. And back in, for me, the late 90s, there wasn't as much sex everywhere. I mean, it was, Sir Mix-a-Lot, my gosh. but it was definitely more muted, than it is today. So you have a lot of questions and curiosities and stuff. And the only message that I was getting, and that everyone in my youth group were getting, was bad, 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 evil of the devil. all of these things. So it is, I think that does affect you because of going through puberty and having questions and having thoughts and then having a boyfriend. And then, like me, if you slip up, there is an avalanche of guilt and shame that is meeting you on the other side of that. And that affected me in all kinds of ways. I think the objectifying sex and women's bodies, I think for me, I guess I can only speak for me, it made me feel, it almost made me look at myself like an object instead of
Yeah.
a human being. And so, and then having issues with my dad and there being neglect there and wanting male attention because of that lack, it just created a perfect storm for me. So when you pair the guilt and shame and then feeling like an object, feeling like you have to do certain things to be accepted by a boyfriend, or it's a mess,
Yeah.
So it definitely did mess with my self-esteem, and it had very negative effects. The identity as a person was the part I just mentioned about feeling like an object. It's like an object that gets dirty that nothing can clean it, which is weird to me because with Jesus,
Yeah.
like, wait a minute. And I'm not saying that people should go out and sleep with a bunch of people and after every time they, pray to Jesus. I know he wants us to be safe and to be obedient to the word. And I don't think God enjoys keeping us from things that are lovely and delightful because he's a mean God. I think there are more reasons than maybe even us humans can comprehend as to why we should wait. I just think the tactic of the way they go about it, it's caused more damage than helped.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah.
That was,
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for filling that out, Jen. Want to say hello to my friend and brother, Alex. Alex has been a friend of True Story Live and also Talking Doctrine back in the day, and a couple of other channels, and really like him, and we're glad that he's here. So welcome. Thank you for coming. Okay. Did it have negative effects on your self-esteem and identity as a person, or was it beneficial? I saw Bobby Meyer said in the chat, I don't know how purity culture could possibly have any positive effects. And that's a great comment, in my opinion. I would say that from the people in charge of putting purity culture out there, the positive effects would be keeping young people from having sex. They might add, preventing unwanted pregnancies, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of focus put on that. But other than that, from their perspective, I don't see how it could be beneficial. I don't think it was beneficial for me. As I mentioned when I answered the question above, it had a minimal effect on me, but the effect it had was not beneficial. It was more an effect from reading the Dr. Dobson book and the idea that permeated the 80s and 90s. It may still be around. I'm just not in those circles. The idea that men, or boys rather, teenagers with their raging hormones can't control themselves. That was extremely difficult for me, and it did affect my self-esteem. It was a negative effect. I was like, oh, I can't control myself. And honestly, with all the hormones I was experiencing and that on top of it, it made me feel dirty. My thoughts, my thought life, my desire to have sex, my masturbation, anything, I didn't want to lust after women. I didn't want to commit adultery in my heart. That was pretty clear. And it made it really difficult for me to function in that culture, for sure. So not beneficial at all to me. And I liked what Jen said. I'd never thought of it from that perspective, but we're taught to have an identity in Christ. But then for women, they make it your identity in your virginity. and somewhat for guys too. I mean, we have the same expectation that we're going to wait until marriage. It's not just the women, but it's way more focused, in my opinion, on the woman and her virginity. So her identity is in her body and in her virginity. And I think the example Jen used about the knife in the poo and the brownie, and asking people, if they want the brownie now, and describing that as that's what happens to a woman when she has sex outside of marriage, before marriage. That's just horrible.
It's not
Nothing,
good.
nothing good about that. Nothing beneficial. And what else could it do but damage someone's self-esteem and identity? It's a real mixed message. Okay, your identity is supposed to be in Christ. No. Wait. Except for your virginity, you get their identity from virginity too. Oh, and your body. You get your identity from your body. Now, I've never experienced that, but I have heard women talk about how that has made them feel. Their identity being in their body and all the control that they supposedly have over keeping men at bay as it comes to this topic. That's my answer. Glenn?
There's some. Oh, sorry.
No, please go ahead.
I was going to say, and some might think this is outrageous, but they say that purity culture equals rape culture. And I know that might sound flamboyant, but if you think about it, if women are the gatekeepers and they're supposed to dress in a way to keep men from looking at them or approaching them or whatever, and if boys and young men are taught, and men taught, that they have so much hormones and lust or whatever, I don't remember how you worded it, Jason, but that it's almost this uncontrollable thing, and then the pressure's put on the women, you can see how that would equal rape, because it's the woman's fault.
Yeah.
And some of you guys might not agree. That's okay. But when you look at the domino effect of what's being taught, what men are being taught, what girls are, what ladies, women, whatever are being taught, it really does kind of funnel into, in a way, men feeling entitled.
Yeah.
And women feeling like the gatekeepers. And, we've all heard stories of women getting blamed for being raped because what they were wearing. That doesn't excuse it. And it also kind of puts men in the light of, like, men are so much stronger than this when it comes to controlling their urges. And I've met many men that are very good at controlling that stuff. You know what I mean? They are out there. And so when this message is being given, it sort of gives men a free pass. Or they might take it that way. I don't know if I'm making sense, but
Sure, you're making sense.
okay.
Yeah,
Good.
they might take it that way. They absolutely might. I mean, just all the pressure and the way that it is presented to people, bad for both. Bad for the men with the urges, as I mentioned, and bad for the girls, and they're not supposed to tempt men. That part is huge. I mean, just even take the purity culture of it, just in general in society. For so long, and as I mentioned, it's included when a woman's raped. They pretty much are cross-examined and put on the stand as to what they did to deserve it. Same thing in marriages. What did you do to deserve getting hit? I mean, it's horrible and it's insidious. So there's that. Hello to our friend Lon, Fisherman in a Box. Welcome.
Hey, Lon.
Yeah.
Glad to see you, bud.
Here. Glad you're here. On the YouTubes with Fisherman in the Box. YouTubes. All right. Glenn, did it have a negative effect on your self-esteem and identity as a person, or was it beneficial?
Irrelevant. But I'm going to give you another answer. Yay,
Okay.
celebration.
Wow.
Woo!
Yeah, balloons are popping and
Fireworks are going.
okay, well, yeah, I think there's another aspect of this, is that when women find themselves cloistered effectively, then they get into a marriage, then it doesn't work. Then they get out of that marriage for many reasons, then they get into a different situation. This is a personal thing, but I'm trying to be respectful, once again, as I should be.
Yeah.
But when someone says to you, I'm going on a journey of self-discovery of my sexuality, and because I feel like I want to rebel and punish those people who judged me.
Right.
See, this is another part of this that is not considered. That
Yeah.
you can be downtrodden but eventually some people are going to break out, and they're going to go crazy.
Yeah.
And I had someone say to me, "Well, I'm going on this voyage. This is not for you, Glenn. This is for myself. If you want to come along for the journey, well, that's fine." And of course, well, I said no, thank you. No, I didn't. I said yes, please.
Yeah.
but it gets weird. It gets to the point where people have their limits of what they're going to take.
Sure.
And you can see that. And if you and sometimes those, when you reach that limit, you can go to the other opposite end and start to go really crazy.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's obviously, I would think it's not desirable either, because you get the point.
Yeah.
So I think that's just, once again, it just doesn't come to an end just because you get married. Suddenly everything is wonderful. No,
Right.
Everything might just be like absolute crap.
Yeah.
I mean, where this expectation comes from that some man is suddenly going to turn a woman's life around, and she's going to feel desired and
Right.
emotionally secure and all
Yeah.
of this stuff. Where's all the stuff here that speaks about the well-being of the person? No. I want sex tonight. What's that do for anybody? That doesn't
Yeah.
make you feel secure. That makes you feel used.
Well, sure.
It's pathetic.
Yeah.
Seriously. And I think more attention should be I think someone said to me yesterday, there should be more education of the young. It's not just of the young, and it's not just about whether you're having sex or not. This. What about the humanity involved in all of this,
Right.
and the respect, all of those things.
Oh. Respect.
Well, absolutely.
Glenn, do you mind? Oh,
Go on, sorry.
I just was gonna. I don't know if you mind sharing this, and if you don't, that's okay.
Sure.
Was your ex-wife a believer when you guys got married?
Very heavy into it.
Okay,
Been
so did
all
that
the
affect
been
y'all's
into
marriage?
all the youth groups.
Yeah.
Absolute nightmare.
Oh man, I'm sorry.
But obviously not only shocking for me, shocking for her too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, no one thinks of the woman. It's all right for me to say, yeah, well, this is terrible for me, but you've got to look at this is a two-way street.
Right.
Yeah.
I feel
Two human
incredibly
beings.
sad for her that's how it was, because you, like I said before, something that you should be embracing suddenly becomes unembraceable because of your baggage.
Right.
Where's your baggage come from? All those years of indoctrination.
Yeah.
And you copying it and believing it. And
Yeah.
suddenly, all of a sudden, you can't... how do you break the walls down? No. Sometimes they're unbreakable.
Yeah. Yeah. Some people take it to the grave. Yeah. Wow.
You build all this up as the great, wonderful adventure that's going to happen while you wait for it.
Right.
And then it's like, it's a dead horse.
Yeah.
That was my
on the road.
experience.
It's
Yeah.
like
First time around.
Yeah, deflation, total deflation. What on earth was I waiting for?
Right.
Get with the right person first.
Yeah.
But deal with things other than, getting sex. Get it? That's just one aspect. And to be honest with you, if you get with the person on a higher level, it's going to be much better down at the sexual level.
Sure.
Get connected with them, not just about sex.
Right.
Yeah.
What were you going to say, Jen?
I just was going to say that, oh, shoot.
Oh, no.
I forgot.
Okay.
It'll come back up. Don't worry. It'll come back up.
I'm not worried. All right. Thank you, Glenn. Appreciate your answer. Marisa, you're up on this one. Did it have negative effects on your self-esteem and identity as a person, or was it beneficial?
Again, I really didn't get affected by the movement, the
Right.
cultural purity
Yeah.
movement. But and certainly when I look back what my mother went through, I mean, she went through the guilt and shame. The guilt and shame that I felt was strictly for things that I regretted doing and choices I regretted making.
Yeah.
But that was separate from this particular cultural movement we're talking about tonight. So,
Yeah.
um, so I guess a short answer for me there, I really wasn't affected by this particular movement we're talking about tonight.
Yeah.
Thanks,
All right.
Nez.
Thank you, Nez. Want to say goodnight to Wild RAT, who's hopping out. Appreciate you being here, and thank you for your comments. We'll see you next time around. Have a good week. Thank you. And also want to say hello to Face the Ace, who popped in the chat while we were talking. Welcome to you as well. Thank you for coming. All right. Okay. Everyone answered the second one. So we're on to if young adults were taught about the responsibility and joys of sex, would they be more promiscuous? Why or why not? So let me fill this out a little bit. So Jen and I were talking about why they would institute this and what did they hope to accomplish by it. And I did mention part of it in saying, well, it keeps people from having sex. But I've just lost my they put all this stuff on people and hope to do it, but they're in the church now. I'm sure we can all relate to this. In the church, there's not a whole lot of information about sex itself. I mean, I'm not saying there should be, but they put themselves in the place of uh, putting purity culture on everyone without a whole lot of information about why they're doing it. Or I mean,
Yeah.
other than the consequences of it, there's not a whole lot of positive things when it comes to sex and the joys of sex. Now, I think it should be up to the parents, but obviously sometimes the parents don't discuss it. Um, my parents never had a discussion with me about that, but I certainly got in trouble for masturbation, and I was warned against looking at porn and things like that. So there was my point is there's a lot of negative aspects, but not any positive. Just say, well, wait until you're married. It's awesome. So the question then, if young adults were taught about responsibility and joys of sex, so those two parts, the responsibility they have, not just putting it on the woman or the man, but the responsibility that a person has. And I'm going to throw in there what Glenn said a few minutes ago about respect. Where does the humanity come in? Where does just the natural respect that people should have for other people?
And themselves, even talking about self-respect.
Oh, sure,
That's not real, in a
Uh,
healthy way.
yeah, that's a given, but I'm glad you brought it up. It should be a given, but it's not. You're absolutely right. So if those elements were included, responsibility and the joys of sex, would they have become promiscuous? I think not. I think if there was more on the positive side and it was more balanced, and they went from the aspect of each of you is responsible within a relationship for what happened. Your individual decisions affect the other person and vice versa. So teaching self-esteem, teaching identity, teaching responsibility, I think would have been way more effective and way more beneficial than what I perceive as what I shouldn't do. Uh,
Yeah.
and in essence, the parts of the Bible that are taught most are what you shouldn't do, not what you should. If what you should do was taught, it would be the verse where Jesus is saying, love God with everything, love your neighbor as yourself, forgiving one another, bearing one another's burdens. Those things would be emphasized rather than don't do this, don't do that. I used to say, and this is what I believe, that the Bible is a book of do's, of don'ts. You know, it's all about what we shouldn't do. I mean, the Ten Commandments are all about what we shouldn't do. So there's not a whole lot from the other side. So I think that they would be less promiscuous if they were better prepared
Like better
for what
educated.
this might be like. Better educated. Yep, that's my answer.
I would agree
Okay.
with that answer. And I had a thought too, and it kind of slipped. I don't know why thoughts slip out of my brain so quickly. One thing I was going to mention regarding the responsibility and talking about humanity, I'd also add on there regarding consent and even boundaries.
Oh yeah.
Because attached to that, if you think about this dynamic, the church teaching that men and women, like men are more important in some
Right.
ways, they teach that. That men and women aren't equal, and even the message of when you become a wife, you're supposed to be submissive to your husband.
Right.
And before marriage, your dad and the pastor and male leaders, and there's some female leaders in there too. But when you get this message of needing to listen to men, I can imagine that would trickle down to if you're in a relationship and a guy has been taught he can't control his urges and he keeps pushing and pushing and pushing. And the girl, she feels like an object. She feels like she can't think for herself. She's got to submit.
Yeah.
There's these messages of submitting to men. You know, it's a whole like, it's just a whole train wreck. Yeah, it's just not good. So the thing I was going to mention on top of your answer, because it was so good, was about boundaries and coercion. I do think that if all the things you listed in those things were taught, it would just make a big difference, in my opinion.
I would agree. So that's your answer. You think? What about you think it would make them less promiscuous or more if they did have those aspects in it, Jen?
I would like to say it would make people be less promiscuous because they have more information. That was what I was going to mention.
There you
That
go.
ties into this. When the Bible, the scripture about Adam knew his wife,
Yeah.
if you look up the Hebrew word for the word knew or know that they use in the Bible, and it's like 290 times,
Right.
it means knowledge. And so a lot of times when they're teaching these things, these parts of what sex is and that it's bad, they're usually talking about intercourse.
Right.
And there is a knowing that happens between husband and wife, between two people, not just getting to know someone's body, but it's spiritual.
Yeah.
I believe that intercourse, that knowing your husband or wife, it's spiritual. It's a whole level that you experience with them that you don't experience with anyone else.
I completely agree.
But so when you're boiling it down to the mechanics, and then you add all this other stuff with purity culture, it's just a recipe for disaster. So yes, I do believe if they were educated and taught about the responsibilities and the joy of it and all these other things that we've mentioned, I think they would be more informed to make a decision, not just it's bad, it's bad, it's bad.
Yeah.
And like you guys had mentioned before, when you withhold, like in your story, even Jason, you could parallel it when you withhold candy and sugar and certain foods from a child, as soon as they're free and able to do, you know what I mean? They go crazy. Like that was what Glenn was saying. It swings to the other side of the pendulum.
Yes.
Like, floodgates open.
Wow. What a great point. Yeah. So just to fill that in a little bit, I have shared with you guys how my parents controlled every aspect of my life. And what it did to me was the minute I had any freedom, I went and tried all the things that I was not allowed to try. And I feel like if they had been a little bit more permissive with stuff, I wouldn't have had the desire to go out and experience everything that I was prohibited from doing growing up. And no, I cannot know for sure that if my parents had been more permissive with certain things, that I would have had as much struggle with my weight and had gone through those things. but that's the way I feel. And it took me a long time to get control of that. So yeah, so that's a really good point, Jen. And it ties into what Glenn had said. Um, and I'm not saying that we just let kids do whatever they want. Nothing like that. It's just if they had let me have more sugar cereal, for instance, then I wouldn't have felt the need when I go to spend the night at someone else's house to experience the way what I considered normal kids get to experience. So anyway, that was a really good point, Jen, tied into what I've shared with you many times about prohibiting someone from something and then they swing to the other end. And I wish I hadn't done that. I'm responsible for my own choices. I know that. And continuing to blame my parents for things in my childhood at this point would be ridiculous and doesn't come to anything good. I just know that if I were a parent, I'm not saying I would be perfect, but I would tweak that whole thing just a little bit. So when it comes to purity culture and this particular question, if they had taught more self-esteem and responsibility on the positive side, I do think it would help people not feel like as soon as they get free, they have to go experience everything. I think that's good.
Hey, can I say something real quick? I was
Sure.
typing vigorously and I accidentally hid Celine. So Celine, if you're still here, I'm so sorry. I was trying to find out how to unhide you and I did, but can any of you guys see her messages?
I can, because I can click on see deleted message.
Okay.
I see her. I see her.
Do you see her
How do I undo this? Because
I think it's temporary.
okay, she said she's back. She said it's okay. I'm so sorry, Celine. One of my knuckles hit it and went crazy while I was typing.
Finger slips happen. I've done it a million times.
Okay, so I'm going to read Celine's messages because we can't bring them back, because I did want to talk about what Celine said. So it does relate to what we're talking about, but Celine first made the point: consent also exists in marriage, which the transformed wife is against. And then I asked, can you explain what you mean? Because I thought that was interesting. Can you explain what you mean by that, Celine? So then she responded, True Story Live, even if the wife isn't in the mood for sex, people like transformed wife think that it's always a husband's right to have sex, and even compares it to cleaning the toilet.
What?
Yeah.
It's not good.
It isn't good. It isn't good. And this ties into what Bobby Meyer has said a couple times tonight. She was saying that it makes women seem like property. And we touched on that briefly. Before you get married, you're the property of your father. I mean, that's some of the traditions we still do, even in secular culture, the idea of giving your daughter away. The father gives the daughter away to the husband. And in Hebrew culture and in the Old Testament, it's very clear that women were the property of the father, and the husband paid a dowry. He purchased her, and then they're the property of the husband. He rules over her. He makes the decision. She does what the husband says. Now, I'm sure there are people that would disagree with that. Every time someone brings this idea up of in the Old Testament, women being property, there's a lot of pushback to that. Well, that was just the culture at the time. That was just the way things were. I even had an argument with my friend Steve about this. Steve is really big on the whole mansphere movement, which I don't like and I think is completely damaging. Sure, there are some good things about it. It's a topic for another time. But we were talking about this very thing, and he was saying what I've heard other people say in the idea of when they would conquer another people group, the Hebrews would conquer another people group, and then they were given orders by Yahweh in the Old Testament that they couldn't just go sleep with one of the women. but they could take her as spoil and marry her, and then they would be their slave wife, right? So even non-Hebrew people were considered property too. They're definitely slaves. And Steve made the point, and he's not the only one making it, that, oh, well, that was the culture at the time, because they wouldn't have had, if their husband was killed in battle by the Hebrews and they just let them fend for themselves, they would have no recourse at all, and they would probably end up dying. And nobody knows that for sure. I mean, I wasn't around back then. I don't know. The point I'm getting to is that biblically speaking, at least Old Testament, women are considered property. And it ties into this whole thing about all the pressure being on the woman, at least for me, and blaming Eve and women for sin even existing in the first place, which I've always thought was ridiculous. So there's that. Okay. Where were we?
My turn. Or next.
All right, go ahead, Glenn. If young adults were taught about responsibility and joys of sex, would they be more promiscuous? Why or why not? What do you say?
I can relate. I'll tell you what I did with my kids. Now, I don't know whether this would be considered reasonable by others, but I didn't focus on sex at all with my kids. What I did was I focused on their behaviour and their attitude towards relationships and people. That then covers everything, including sex. And if you want to get the specifics, you can. But I found that I really didn't have to go into the topic that deeply at all, because they were using the same sort of responsible behaviours across the board.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
In a more holistic sort of a way, across their whole living.
Right.
So I think maybe if the church took some of the, with youngsters, if you just keep harping on something and driving it home, they're going to do the opposite. So turn it around, I think, and treat it as not so relevant. And then I think you'll find that it all comes out in the wash. And I think, I can't see that if it's broached about respect in relationships, all of those values that we've spoken about constantly, if that is the thing that is harped on, no matter in what situation you're in, the way you treat others, etc., you don't steal from them, all of those things, etc., they're all relevant when it comes to your attitude towards sex. And I think if that gives a person a much more balanced approach, because they realise there's a way to behave, and one of them is not having expectations and forcing yourself upon a woman or a man or whoever,
right,
when they say no thank you.
No thank you. Right. Respect and no thank you.
It's easy.
Yeah.
They just don't even think about doing something like that, because
right,
they're not. Their attitude is one, I come from a respect place. So they're not going to say force themselves or say I want this, and if the woman says no, they're not. It's not going to even enter their head, because this is the way they live.
Yeah.
So that's
what an excellent point. So that ties into their self-esteem, their identity, rather than focusing on all the things that they shouldn't do, is growing them, or trying to grow them, helping them grow into a responsible person.
Correct. And that responsibility entails not wanting to or exercising control over another human being.
Yeah. Yeah, I would never even consider that my desire for sex would be so hot that if my wife, whom I love and care about, was not in the mood, that I would want her to fulfill my desires. I wouldn't even consider it. It doesn't even enter my mind. When I hear about these husbands or I hear from women the stories about, I mean, I had a headache, and it's a running joke in the secular world, is, oh, not tonight, I have a headache. So it's not just within Christianity, just in general, that a woman doesn't doesn't have the right within a marriage to say, not tonight, no thank you. And in my opinion, the man should be like, oh, okay, you're not in the mood, no problem. But within Christianity, we're told that it is the woman is not to deny her husband sex unless they both agree. Well, I mean, I hate to go against the way the scripture is taught, but I think read between the lines of scripture and see what I see, which is that women and men are equal. They should be equal. They should both have their autonomy, but within the marriage be supplemental to each other, complementary to each other. That's a topic for another time, but I love
Chris, I was just going to say, the man who shows respect to the woman who says no will get respect reciprocated, but it won't happen if you force yourself on her, and she's going to hold it against you for a long time to come, because look what you've done to her. You've devalued her in that moment.
right.
Women won't take it, and neither
Right.
should they, in my opinion.
Well,
No
ask
way. How would you do that to somebody?
exactly. Ask Jen, and this isn't me bragging, but ask Jen how she feels about that. Have you ever felt like I've ever forced you to do anything, or
No.
would force you to do
Guilted me
anything?
or coerced me or shamed me and guilted me? No, not once.
I don't think about it. It doesn't enter my mind to do that.
See, but you working from a healthy relationship, like I just said, that's where you're coming from, a healthy relationship point of view in which that type of attitude is not tolerated and not even thought about, because you wouldn't do it. You wouldn't think of doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you've got to ask yourself, so why do some men think that this is acceptable?
Yeah.
And why do some women think it's acceptable as well? What on earth is going on?
It's a big mess, Glenn. It's a big mess. Alex said in the chat they shouldn't deny each other. I'm not saying they should. I'm just saying that if there's mutual respect, each person totally respects the other person. You're going to take into consideration how the other person feels, just in general, not just about sex, but with everything. And yes, as I've talked to Jen, sometimes there are times when you have to push through something. I think of, when money is tight and you're not feeling too good and you can't miss a day of work. Sometimes I have to work, even if I don't want to. So that's just one example. But certainly in relationships, it goes a lot further than that. I don't want to force my wife to do anything. If she does something, I want it to be because she chose to do it.
And wants to.
And that seems so simplistic and so easy, but I feel like it should be that. It should be that. If my wife has a headache or whatever the reason might be, it might be that, she just doesn't feel like it. I don't feel up to it tonight. Am I so out of control with my sexual desire that I can't wait until the next night or the morning? Who knows? She might feel better in the morning. And what's wrong with me that if she does capitulate and helps me out or whatever way you want to look at it, what does that say about me that that's okay? So my sexual desires are higher than my respect and admiration for my wife. Her needs are so below mine that I have to have it right now. And then I'm okay with it after, turn around and go to sleep while she feels used. Not for me. I can't do it.
Personally, I think, just talking generally, I think, experience says that most women will be falling over themselves to sleep with a person if you are kind and emotionally supportive towards them, not being an arsehole.
Right. Right. I like the way you phrased that. Supportive of you not being an asshole. That's good. Our friend Believe said, sex isn't a tool of manipulation. It should be celebrated in a marriage, not necessarily planned, but certainly not compulsion.
Yeah. Amen.
Beautifully said, Believe. Thank you. Wow, this has been a great discussion. We have time left for the rest of the questions. Marisa, forgive me, I don't remember if you answered this last question yet.
I don't remember what the question was, to be quite
Let,
honest.
let me read it. You can remind me if you did answer it. If young
I
adults
don't
were
think she has.
okay, if young adults were taught about the responsibility and joys of sex, would they be more promiscuous? Why or why not? What's your take on that one?
I think education about what sexuality is, what can result from it, and if you are trying to operate within a religious paradigm, uh, specifically Christianity, if you are made aware and taught what Scripture has to say about it, what Jesus has to say about it. Education, long story short, is a
Right.
good idea all the way around.
Oh,
What can
yeah.
happen physically, from diseases to pregnancy, uh, who's responsible, and in my opinion, if you're partaking of it, you're partly responsible for what happens because of it. Um,
Oh,
Yeah.
Takes two to tango, my mother would say. Um, so I think education is a very big, important tool, as well as patience and respect, and just my way of seeing things. I don't particularly find myself just wanting to be with whoever I was with at the time, um, just because I wanted to. For me, I agree with Glenn as much as it's more important to connect and have that mutual respect,
yeah.
and then you find things are attractive, and then that makes the coming together sexually more well, a much better positive experience.
Yeah.
Uh,
Beautifully said.
that's what I think. But now where I'm at and what I've been through, I think I wish I would have just waited, all the way
Right.
around for so
Right.
many things. But I wouldn't have my son or my daughter if I didn't. So God makes a way of working things out. And I don't
Yeah.
regret having them. I'm glad that I do. But I just wish I could have personally done things a little differently.
Mm.
But I really personally wasn't affected by this particular cultural movement. I was just taught the basics that it's you really should wait for marriage,
Yeah.
and there are plenty of good reasons for that,
Right.
particularly if you walk the Christian walk.
Right.
So that's all I can contribute
That was
as
a
far as.
wonderful, wonderful
That's
But
beautifully
I
worded.
feel
Thank you,
bad for
Max.
people who went through the ring and the dance and all. Oh my goodness, how embarrassing! I'm so sorry.
Oh,
Good Lord.
yes.
Well,
I am so grateful that you weren't exposed to that, Des.
yeah. Yeah. And Maurice, I hope this comes across the way I mean it, but I am so glad to have you back at your animated self.
Thank you so much. My son came to visit, and so I got a little energy boost, I think.
I
Thank
love it.
you.
Yay. His presence pricked you up. Love it.
Thank you, Marisa. All right. Next one. Do you think by purity culture focusing more on sex caused young adults to have a higher preoccupation with it? Now we touched
Yes.
on this. Oh yeah, yeah. We touched on this a little bit when Jen brought up how my parents controlled my food and like sugar cereal and all that, and R-rated movies. That's another thing. Wasn't allowed to watch R-rated movies. There was a few that they would they let me watch Rocky when I was under 17. Um, it's bloody and violent, whatever, boxing, but they let me watch that. There was a handful of movies they let me watch. But anytime I got away, got to spend the night at a friend's house and they had HBO, I watched R-rated movies. And I'm not saying that that was a good thing. I'm focusing back on how I had a higher preoccupation with these things because they were so restricted. And I love my parents. In many ways, they were good parents in so many other ways, but in this way, it's like when you tell someone they can't have something, they just want it more. You tell the kid they can only have one cookie, they're going to want two. Now, some would say, especially a Calvinist would say, well, that's that viper in the diapers. That's that sinful nature that, babies are born into a sinful world and they're useless pieces of garbage right from the get-go. They're not innocent. They're crying and wailing and wanting their own way is a sign of their sinful nature. That's what they would say. But I absolutely think that you have the story of Adam and Eve again. There it is. We're told Yahweh made this garden, and He created the very thing that would cause people to sin. I've never understood it, and that's a topic for another time. But the point I'm making is that when you create a whole garden of good food to eat, and you give them permission and say you can have all this wonderful, beautiful, amazing stuff, and speak to the animals and name them, and have sex with the wife that I made for you, and commune with me and walk in the garden, all these wonderful things, except for that. You cannot have that. If you have that, the minute you eat it, or the day you eat it, you'll die. What are people going to want? Oh, and it calls it the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Knowledge of good and evil. What's that? I don't have that. What's that all about? You're going to have the desire to do it. That's the point. So, do you think purity culture focusing more on sex caused young adults to have a higher preoccupation with it? Absolutely, unequivocally, yes. Again, if the above question was part of it, and like Glenn added, if you teach them how to be good human beings, respectful and kind and loving and all of that, and not just focus on all the don'ts, I think that would have made a huge difference. Instead, you're like telling people, but really at an early age, before they even really know what sex is about, this whole idea of purity culture. Oh, yeah, you can have this, this, and this, but don't do this, and focus on that the whole time. Oh, and here's a ring, here's a dance, here's a dinner from your dad, and it's all the stuff laid on you, and it's all to get you not to do something. There's something in the idea of being pure too that could be positive, but I just don't know how, with all the negative things wrapped around it. It's difficult for me to see that.
Yeah.
So my answer is yes. If they had focused less on it,
It
on
might
the
not have brought
negatives.
so much attention.
Right. I think. What do you think, Jen?
I agree.
Yeah.
I think putting that much pressure and making such a big deal out of it kind of puts sex on a pedestal. And I mean, it's
Yeah.
great. It can be great, but it's not the whole world. It's not the only thing that matters. And so it's kind of strange to me to look at this purity culture movement and how much attention is paid to it. And then I see the world
Yeah.
and sex is everywhere. It's like it seems to be in the church a lot, but it's different from the world. It's not in your face, but it's still all this attention going to it,
Right.
you know?
Right. Exactly.
So yeah, that's my short answer.
Okay. Marisa?
I'm sorry, I was answering Bobby in the chat. What now?
Oh, that's quite all right. You got to answer Bobby. Okay. So do you think by purity culture focusing more on sex that caused young adults to have a higher preoccupation with it?
I think it's natural to pay attention to something you're told not to pay attention to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's tough.
That's good. All
Glenn?
right. Glenn, you think?
Yeah, okay. Well, of course.
Yeah.
I think the issue here is that they focus on the negatives. They say if you do this, you're going to get pregnant. If you do this, you'll get venereal disease. If you do this, you'll lose you'll be tainted. If you all the negatives, but maybe if they use the reverse strategy, and told them about the positives of sex, they may well be inclined to wait for it.
Right. Right.
Great point.
Excellent point.
They may think, well, geez, if this is so good, I'm happy to hang out.
Yeah.
And not now have to be rebellious because other people are telling me how bad it is. Well, I'm going to just go and do it because young adults not thinking rationally in that sense, are they? They're not thinking.
No.
They're only there. They're going to punish the person who. Well, that's probably me. I'm going to punish the person who tells them not to do something by doing the opposite.
Right.
So use reverse psychology.
And sometimes I think people are trying to punish God. Just
Ooh, by
exactly
being
in the
rebellious.
context by being rebellious. Exactly.
Good point. All right. We have 2 more questions, and we have about 10 minutes. So
Speed round.
yeah, speed round. Who was affected more by purity culture, men or women, or were they equally affected, just in different ways? And I'll go first because my answer will be short. I feel it's definitely the women that were affected more because most of the focus was on them. Men and boys, teenagers were affected. I'm not saying they weren't affected at all, but both were affected, and yes, different ways. The whole weight of the pressure, in my opinion, was put on the girls, while the boys were told you have no control over your sexual urges, just don't do it. And then the pressure was put on the women to be the gatekeepers of their bodies.
Yeah.
So that's my short answer. Let's switch it up a little bit, and we'll ask Marisa, who was affected more by purity culture, in your opinion, men or women, or were they equally affected, just in different ways? What's your thought on that?
Honestly, I'm not up on the statistics well enough to properly or adequately answer that question. If I had to venture a guess, like in most situations, at least coming from a woman's perspective, that most of the pressure is going to be put on the woman, the most of the focus is going to be on the woman. It's the woman's fault, it's the woman's responsibility. Who's lauded as a whore? The woman. Who's paraded and patted on the back for sexual conquest? The man. I'm not saying every man, but that's the pattern per se, I would say, for most social dynamic structures we can place this in. So
Yeah.
that's just my thought on that.
Fair
I'll tell you,
enough.
Nez, for someone that didn't survive through this movement, your answers have just been gold.
Yeah. Yeah.
Praise
You're
the Lord.
wonderful.
I was praying before the stream like I always do. So thank
Yeah.
you, Lord.
Yeah.
All right.
Glenn, who was affected more by purity culture, in your opinion, men or women, or were they equally affected, just in different ways? What's your thought?
I sort of agree with Bobby to an extent in that I think both parties have been affected, but I think it's women who carry the legacy of it. They're the ones that carry it and seem to carry it and be more affected by it down the line than men.
Yeah.
Because women are judged more than men.
Sure.
And if they are then divorced, what happens if they are looking to re-enter the Christian marriage, saying, well, what comes to them then is the first, does a woman stand potentially to be rejected by a future Christian husband because of what's happened in the past? So does the woman shut up and hide it?
Yeah.
Or does the woman declare themselves with the risk of having
Rejected.
this legacy they carry coming back against them? I think the women are way worse off ultimately.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah. I would agree as well.
Yep.
One thing I wanted to add from the men's side, and
Sure.
some people in our chats might have heard of this woman, Sheila Gregory.
Yeah.
I think I'm saying her name correctly. She wrote the book Bare Marriage, which is very good, especially people that have gone through sexual trauma
Yeah.
within Christian marriages. But there was one guy in her book, or on one of her posts, that was sharing that when he read those books, and I think one of them was written by the gentleman you had mentioned earlier, Dobson.
Yeah.
I don't remember which book it was, but because there was so much in that book that was telling young men that these desires are huge and they're out of control and so on and so forth. This one particular gentleman that was commenting to Sheila, or was in her book, was talking about how it affected his self-esteem, because he looked at it like, men are supposed to be strong
Yeah.
and we're leaders, but
Right.
there's this thing that I have no control over, and it just it affected his self-esteem.
Yeah.
It made him feel like, and then there's so much pressure, and there's all this talk about, controlling your thoughts, and
Yeah.
bouncing your eyes, and all these different tactics they give within the purity culture directed toward young men. It really affected him badly. And it
Yeah.
was just interesting to see the other side of it. But I do agree with y'all's answers. I definitely think women, receive more of the brunt. I said blunt. Ooh, brunt.
Yeah. Thank you, Jen. I've never seen you overshare. Never seen you overshare. I know that you do that, and that's okay. But I just want you to know that everything you say is always appreciated. All right. Okay. Last question. Do you think it's churches' responsibility to educate and control the sexuality of young people? Do you think it's the church's responsibility to educate and control the sexuality of young people? Jen?
This could be two questions, but I see that it's in one, obviously.
Sure.
I think it should rest on the parents. Truly, I
Yeah.
really do. Because I think this is another thing that this creates a problem, is that when purity culture is being taught in youth groups, I think sometimes parents think, oh, the church is covering it.
Yeah.
I
yeah.
don't have to talk to them about it more, because the youth leader is giving them the skinny on what all's going on,
Wow.
So then there ends up being this gap in information and education, and neither the church or the parents are filling it in. So then a lot of times kids turn to porn or their friends or rated R movies, or all kinds of things to garner the information that they don't have. It hasn't been given to them.
Right.
So
Excellent.
now with I would say no on both of those fronts. I do think it should be the parents' responsibility. I think the church should be a support to the parents. You know what I mean? Because that's my short answer.
I agree completely. And just in the same way, public schools, it shouldn't be their responsibility to teach sex ed. And it's not their responsibility. It is the parents. I think in both cases, the churches and the public schools take on that responsibility. They assume that parents aren't doing it. And some parents don't like that. I've read many articles in the past of how, especially lately, this whole gender thing, topic for another time that we're never going to cover, but the idea of children should choose their own gender, and they're teaching that in some public schools, and parents are reasonably upset about doing that, about them deciding what the kids should know and what they shouldn't know. I mean, if they just kept it to arithmetic and English and social studies and topics like that, that'd be good. But they get into the social topics too often. But that's not what the question's about. Do you think that it's church's responsibility to educate and control the sexuality of young people? Absolutely not. I like what Jen said. Be supportive of what the parents teach. Be a supplement or a complement to what the parents should be teaching their children. And this goes back to what Glenn mentioned about raising a child to be human, responsible, have a healthy self-esteem, kind, generous.
Think of others.
Yeah, exactly. So that's my answer. Marisa.
I enjoyed that part of being a parent when I went through it with Jason, and I'm enjoying going through that with Diana. Whether the public school system decides to participate in properly educating my children on anything, who can say if they're going to do that on any given day, on any given topic? A lot
Right.
of things we disagree on, and that's a whole nother series of shows we could do about that.
Right.
That
Right.
being said, um, at the very least, the the science and biological classes should be teaching about in physiology what it is, what it does,
Sure.
what can be the actual results from
Yeah.
every part of it, A to Z, the chemicals that are released.
Yeah.
Talk about
Yeah.
endorphins. I mean, the whole enchilada.
Yeah.
The diseases, everything,
Yeah.
the whole, you know. But it really is up to the parent first and foremost. I believe that's just something. If you've gone to the trouble to have a child, that's one of the things you're going to have to do is have air quotes you can't see, the talk.
Right.
Yeah.
And I took the initiative both times with both of my children over the fathers.
Yeah.
I
Nice.
started early. Uterus starts with you. Oh
Yeah.
boy. So I thoroughly enjoyed that. So yes, parents, step up.
Oh,
Yep.
step up parents. And I actually was going to disagree with you, Jason. Not well, I don't know if disagree would be the right word, but when you had mentioned earlier that the gap that I had mentioned between what the church is teaching and what parents are teaching, and I think you had said that the parents are. What did you say? You said the parents are leaning on the schools to teach it.
What I believe I said was that the schools seem to assume that the parents aren't teaching their kids what they need to know, so they take up the banner. I think
Yeah,
that's what I
gotcha.
was saying.
So I was going to say, I think even in that dynamic between parents and the school system,
Uh-huh.
I do think the school system is really good, like Nez had said about teaching the mechanics, like the information and
Sure.
in the mechanics of intercourse and
Exactly.
periods and all that stuff. And I think
Yeah.
sometimes the parents actually assume maybe that's all they need to know about it. So there's still that
Right.
gap in between where the relational side, the
Sure.
self-respect and respecting other
Yeah.
people and intimacy and all the feelings and emotions and relational side still seems to have a gap. You know what I mean,
Yeah.
between both the parents and the church, but also between the parents and the schools.
And if I
Exactly.
Which
may
makes sense.
interject,
Yeah,
I would just submit to you that's because most parents don't have a clue about that themselves. So how are they going
I
to
would
tell that to
agree.
their kids?
I would
You
so
know?
agree. And then I think parents are like, "Oh, the school will teach them about that stuff that I'm not good at."
Yeah.
Or maybe they just don't care. I don't know. Or maybe that, like you said, they don't know really all the mechanics of that part of intimacy and sex. So
Right.
how would they teach their kids if they don't know about it?
Exactly.
Um, yeah. This was
Thank
a
you.
great conversation, guys. I
Yeah, it
really
really
enjoyed
was.
this.
Glenn,
I
you're
know
up.
we could go for another hour. My goodness, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, you're fine. Glenn, you're last up on this one. Do you think it's the church's responsibility to educate and control the sexuality of young people? And then after you answer, I'm going to read Bobby's statement because I think it's really good.
Oh, is he still with
You're
us?
muted, my friend.
Oh, you're right. I'm muted because I had something to say and give a long answer. Oh,
Oh.
I'm depressed now. Okay, let's take control of the sexuality of young people and ditch that one in the bin because that ain't going to happen. Okay, well, I think if I, no, it's not the church's responsibility, but I think if the church always has someone available, if someone comes to them, what's the word? Like, well, geez, I've just lost it from it. The word confidentially,
Uh-huh.
and wants to discuss something, that they have someone there that can handle this matter with
Yeah.
sensitivity,
Mm-hmm.
and at least give positive acknowledgement to the person who's prepared to come to them in the first place. So I think you could call it a responsibility of sorts that they're available to the community. I'd hate to see
Yeah.
the church say, "Well, we don't know anything about this. Go read the Bible."
Right.
I mean, that shouldn't happen. Or
Right.
go ask your parents. You can't. An inquisitive young person does not need to be fobbed off.
No.
Because they're not
No.
coming back.
Right.
And I like that idea, Glenn, because a lot of children that do have a lot of questions, and this is normal, sometimes they're really embarrassed to talk to their parents about it.
Correct.
Oh,
So it
sure.
would be helpful to have a third person that's
Correct.
not familial to
And
Yeah.
to
someone they
talk with
can
them.
trust, like,
Yeah.
and I think there's some people in churches you can positively trust, and I think other people you wouldn't go near them with a barge pole.
Right.
Because this is in confidence, and they also need to have the skills to be able to speak to a young person. See, I'm just going to add on with this. One of the issues in the church is that the person who they're going to have probably responsible or available is going to be an old person, and you've got a young person fronting up, and they're not on the same planet. So,
Yeah.
like as I was speaking about this with Levi yesterday, and he said, well, as a young person, we think the old people just don't, they're all fuddy-duddies, etc. And the old people say, well, oh, the young people, they know nothing, they haven't got any experience, so there's
Right.
an impasse.
Right.
And I said, well, you can't expect a young person to put an old person's head on a young person's shoulders, but
Right.
an older person can bring himself back to the level of a younger person, like the child who sits on the floor playing with his Lego. You
Yeah.
can get on the floor and sit with them if you want to, but not a lot of older people want to do that. So then
Right.
it becomes an issue within the church. Precisely who is going to be the person? They've got to be an understanding person prepared to get down with the younger ones. So
Yep.
that's that one. And I'll just, because the next bit is, because it might lead into something else, I don't know. But Leo had this ongoing discussion about, okay, how do we view certain issues that come up? And one of them has been sort of ongoing. Well, what do you, because he's coming from a place of inexperience in the world, what do you do if you attach a woman that you really, really like, love, or getting serious about, and then declares herself and said, I've slept with 50 men. What's your attitude? And I said, well, we compared his attitude to my attitude. Not saying either of us is correct, it's just personal opinion.
Right.
And he said, well, I would have to consider whether I would forgive her. And
Right.
my response was, what's this got to do with forgiveness? Either you
Right.
accept her or you don't.
Right.
See, two different perspectives. And I think they're all about forgiveness, whereas I'm about acceptance. Now,
Sure.
I think it's potential there for another show, and about how religion has a different way of approaching a lot of these topics than other ways that can be approached in the world from a relationship perspective. And I think it's much deeper than just purity culture, that's for sure.
Oh, well, sure. Yeah. Our attempt isn't, it's just to talk about the one aspect of it. And
But you can see how this opens the floodgates.
well, sure it
Yeah.
does, because it just sparked, my brain just went on fire when what you're saying is, what if Christianity was about God being accepting of us rather than it being about how sinful and pieces of garbage we were?
The whole dynamic of a lot of relationships immediately changes, in my opinion, for the better.
Right, and our perception of God changes. Wow, I have to consider that more.
Interesting one, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Wow, that was an amazing discussion.
Levi's great. I really enjoy speaking with him.
Yeah,
For sure.
yeah.
I'll be getting his feedback on this too, don't worry.
I hope so. That'd be great. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Michael.
All right. All right. So, thank you,
You
everyone.
want to read the last part?
Yeah, go ahead. Sure.
Okay. Thank you for joining us in this discussion. Many people are still hurting from these far reaching messages, riddled with guilt and shame. I believe God created sex to be a beautiful mutual experience. I'm truly encouraged that there are a handful of people bringing light to the damage this message has caused and having a deeper conversation around this topic of sex, getting more information out there to counter these messages. Have an amazing night, guys, and thank you for tuning into True Story Live.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jen. And thank you for all the effort you put into this write-up and all the thought and being transparent and sharing some very difficult stuff. I'm extremely proud of my wife and humbled. A lot of that stuff is hard to hear. And if it's hard for one person, think about all the people that struggled with this concept. And as we pointed out, they carry it with them if it's never dealt with into marriage. And how much does it affect intimacy in marriage? So we will talk about what's going to happen next week. But I want to thank everyone for being a part of tonight's broadcast. We saw a couple people in here that we haven't seen in a while. Our friend Alex and also our friend Believe. And you guys, as I always say, come late if you need to. And if you don't come around for a while, that's totally fine. We're just happy you're here whenever you decide to grace us with your presence, and no sarcasm there. We appreciate everyone in the chat and lots of good comments in the chat from everyone. And also something I don't need to worry about in this chat is people tearing each other up, which I've complained about over and over again within Christianity. It's one of the things that irritates me the most. When people have disagreements, they can't just, it's not even just about agree to disagree. They can't even treat each other with respect and dignity if they do disagree on something. And that's something I wish I could change about Christianity. In fact, I would be more comfortable within it if that aspect, and it's one of the reasons why I looked into deconstruction. It never made sense to me, Paul saying, be of one mind. And then these people can't even agree on the simple gospel in some ways, But anyway, that doesn't happen in this chat, which I appreciate very much. We'll see everyone next Sunday, and I hope everyone has a good week. Good night. Jen, take a minute to say goodbye to everyone. If you have any closing comments, please make them.
All right. Thank you guys, everyone who joined us tonight. I know some people popped in and out. That's totally cool. Everyone's welcome, whether you stay for a minute or the whole 2 hours. This was really, really wonderful and healing also, having these discussions around topics that are hard to relive, hard to talk about, hard to share, can be embarrassing, and then just the whole topic of sex and people being really, which I feel like this group here has been really open and received it well. So I'm really grateful. You guys are really encouraging. So thanks for the discussion. Thank you for all the comments in the comment section. Really, really appreciate every single one of y'all's thoughts. And Celine, just one more apologize with hiding you. My apologies. Yeah. You guys have a great week, and we'll see you next weekend. Yeah, thank you. And what Jen just said, I'll elaborate a little bit on that too. We didn't know how this was going to come across because, anytime you deal with a topic like this, and a lot of topics, when we're asking questions about Christianity, things that happen within Christianity, I would understand, and I do understand that a lot of other Christians have a hard time with that because we're raised not to ask questions. We're raised just to listen to our pastor, listen to our parents, and kind of keep our mouths shut. And that's not just my experience, the experience of many, many other people out there that I've read their story. And in fact, I feel like if people asked more questions and were allowed to ask questions, I think this deconstruction thing wouldn't be happening. What was that quote last night that we saw in the show that I wanted to share? Do you have that? I just pulled it up before you even said anything. Okay. It says, people who don't ask questions have blind faith, and blind faith is the furthest thing from faith. I just love that. I love it. And to me, it's very true. My deconstruction isn't about me running away or moving away from God. It's about moving away from things that I believe are not part of who he is and who he wants us to be. That's what it's about. And thank God that I'm able to ask questions, and I believe God can handle our questions. It's people that often can't. People can't handle our questions. Either they don't have answers or it makes them too uncomfortable to give answers, And certainly a pastor and many other people within the church
in the hierarchy of the church are not willing to say, I don't know, let's look at scripture together. Let's ask God the question. I see that as only beneficial. More on that as we go. Glenn, take a minute to say goodbye to the peoples, please.
I'll just say that these topics reach beyond Christians, and I think we need to be aware of that. They affect lots of people, regardless.
Sure.
Yeah, that's very
And,
true.
I was just going to say, well, Jen got free therapy, and she also dispensed therapy to others. So look about win-win, eh?
It's a win-win.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
true.
Good
Yeah.
one, Jen. I like it when you get down and put yourself on the line. I think it's I think everybody here is very appreciative and respectful that you took that on, and brilliant. So thank you.
Wow.
Thanks,
Thank you.
guys.
All right. Last but certainly not least, Marisa, would you be willing to say goodbye to the peoples and close us out if you would?
Absolutely, Jason. Thank you so much. Jen, wonderful all the way around, from what you shared and what you wrote, and just the way this flowed tonight. Thank you so much, everybody who participated and contributed. This isn't an easy subject to deal with. And Glenn, you're right. It does encompass more people than just people who follow Jesus. There are people who've been roped into guilt and shame and made a spectacle and abused. Let's just call it what it is.
Yeah.
Over this particular cultural movement. And it's a real sin and a real shame. And I'm grateful you could share your experiences with us tonight, Jen. And I hope that helped you
It
take some
did.
positive step forward. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. Oh, what a great show and discussion. Thank you, everybody who came tonight. Please take a moment to share it on your social media. If ever there was one to share, please share this one out tonight. What a great, great discussion. And I'm looking forward to next Sunday, when we'll have another great discussion right here on True Story Live. Have a great week, everybody. Good night, and God bless.